Hello, and welcome to FTA's Circular 5010 Award Management Requirements Training Series. I am Trina Trotman with the Office of Program Management. Our office designed this series to provide our recipients and stakeholders a better understanding of changes made to FTA's official guidance on award management and other requirements that pertain to FTA financial assistance. To ensure we are all on the same page, we want to remind everyone that this presentation does not have the force and effect of the law and is not intended to bind the public in any way. It is educational and informational in nature with an intent to explain some of our existing requirements under laws or agencies' policies. Now I would like to introduce Bruce Robinson to provide our welcoming remarks.
Hello, my name is Bruce Robinson, FTA's Associate Administrator for Program Management. On behalf of the team here at the Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, I'm delighted to provide a brief introduction to the upcoming video training. FTA turned 60 years old this year, and one of our most exciting projects this year was updating several of FTA's major program circulars, as well as FTA's Award Management Requirements Circular, which is needed for all awards FTA administers. Over the last 2 years, staff worked tirelessly to update these circulars, working with headquarters and regional offices, as well as reaching out for public comment to update these documents. 4 circulars are Circular 5010, the Award Management Requirements Circular, Circular 9050, the Urbanized Area Formula Grant Program Guidance. This circular replaces, consolidates, and updates guidance for the Urbanized Area Formula Grant Program, the State of Good Repair Grant Program, and the Urbanized Area Formula component of the Grants of Buses and Bus Facilities Program. In addition, Circular 9040, the Rural Area Formula Grant Program Guidance, consolidates and updates guidance for the Buses and Bus Facilities Program, that is rural, and the Formula Grants for Rural Area Program. Finally, Circular 97 is the Enhanced Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities Program Guidance. As part of the updated circular release, FTA developed a video series for each circular to relay key information and highlight changes. Additionally, the team developed a number of materials to help work with grantees and help set the stage for understanding federal financial assistance requirements surrounding administering federal fund awards. This circular and training series is specifically designed to assist FTA's efforts to improving customer service and streamlining our processes, as well as reflecting and incorporating provisions from the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, or more commonly the FAST Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as changes to the Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for Federal Awards, more commonly referred to as 2 CFR 200 or the Uniform Guidance, as well as incorporating changes to FTA's policies and procedures. We hope you find these videos informative. FTA has created a general email address for questions related to this update, FTA Circular Update 2024 at dot.gov, to assist in addressing questions regarding this release. For questions about information in the circulars, please reach out to your FTA regional contacts. But for now, please enjoy the show. Thank you.
Each Friday from October the 18th through November the 15th, 2024, FTA is posting a series of pre-recorded videos addressing summary grants management information and highlighting changes made in each of the revised circulars, including our award management requirements circular and each of our formula program circulars. The Circular 5010 Award Management Requirements Training builds upon the foundation we established in the previous Summary of Grants Management series. This session and the next 2 sessions will focus on updates to Circular 5010. This series was developed to highlight many of the structural and substantive changes made to the circular to help users navigate and better understand the circular as a guidance tool. The illustration on the right outlines the general topics for the sessions in this series. The route ahead is our agenda. For Session 1, we will walk through an introduction to Circular 5010, including a high-level overview of changes and its effective date, changes to circular definitions, the relationship of the circular to FTA programs, updates to civil rights and procurement requirements, the addition of general transit-related cross-cutting FTA requirements to the circular, and new guidance on project signage. Now I would like to introduce our speakers, Alexis Fisher and Brett Martin from the Office of Program Management. Alexis and Brett are both members of my staff who work with Circular 5010 and its use as a guidance tool on a daily basis. To start us off, I will turn it over to Brett.
Thank you, Trina. I am Brett Martin, Senior Program Analyst in FTA's Office of Guidance and Grants Management at our headquarters in Washington, D.C. And before I get started, I would like to note that I will move through some of the slides that include a lot of detail rather quickly to really focus on the primary points we want to communicate. However, the finer details on each of the slides will be available for further viewing following our presentation. Okay, so let's start with the purpose of Circular 5010, and one of the best ways to do this is to discuss what the circular is versus what it is not. Circular 5010 is a compendium of general guidance on requirements and procedures applicable to all FTA financial assistance. It is not a compendium of guidance on program or topic-specific requirements or procedures, such as for specific formula or discretionary programs, or topics such as planning requirements or civil rights. While Circular 5010 may touch on some of those types of topics, those programs and many specific topics have their own circulars or other guidance venues that address requirements, procedures, and other pertinent information that is specific to those programs or topics. Circular 5010 is intended to be a tool for recipients and other users to understand how requirements or procedures may apply to their specific situations or considerations. It is not meant to address case-specific guidance or direction on all FTA requirements for each unique situation. In doing so, the circular identifies the rigidity versus flexibility of those requirements and works to guide users in making their own decisions. It is not meant to serve as specific instructions or scenario-specific technical assistance. It's also important to point out that the circular explains how laws, regulations, or policies active at the time of its publication apply to FTA-assisted activities and awards, but it is not the law and is not a substitute for applicable laws, regulations, or policies that are determined outside of the circular's scope, which is really most of what is included in the circular. One way I like to summarize what I just covered is Circular 5010 is akin to lanes, wayfinding signs, and guardrails for award management and other universal requirements for FTA assistance. It is not a document that provides specific directions for unique recipient situations, considerations, or award management cases. Another important point to make is where the circular falls in terms of its effect on communicating how requirements or procedures are to be operationalized, or for setting rules or requirements on its own relative to other elements that establish the governance framework for FTA financial assistance. The order of precedence for this framework gives our governing statutes, the United States Code, primary supremacy, followed by the Code of Federal Regulations, then FTA's Master Agreement, then FTA's circulars, including 5010, and then award application documents. This is the order of control these elements have over requirements for the administration and use of FTA financial assistance. Okay, so a little more here on Circular 5010's relationship to federal statutes, regulations, and policies that have that supremacy. I mentioned earlier that these laws, regulations, and policies that govern the administration and use of FTA financial assistance are determined and established outside the scope of the circular. And so it's important to point out that Circular 5010 is mostly a blueprint for operationalizing the applicability of these laws, regulations, and policies to the life cycle of awards made with FTA financial assistance. In doing so, the circular does a lot of explaining of the applicability of those laws, regulations, and policies, and provides references to external sources from which the requirements are derived throughout. However, while the lion's share of the circular's contents are mostly doing that, the circular also sets some policy on its own that builds upon and is not directly addressed by federal statutes or regulations. Okay, so now that we've established the circular's purpose and function, with this foundation set, let's move along and discuss the high-level changes we made to the circular between the pre-existing version 5010.1E and the updated version 5010.1F. The changes made to the circular really fall into 4 overarching categories, which include updates that were made to reflect changes to applicable laws and government-wide regulations determined outside the scope of the circular since the circular was last updated in 2018. Separately, but also similarly, updates to reflect changes in FTA established policies and procedures over the same time frame. We also included a number of updates to enhance our explanation and clarification of how statutes, regulations, and policies apply to FTA-assisted awards, including those that both changed and did not change, and updates to streamline, enhance, and improve stakeholder guidance on universal requirements for recipients' use of FTA financial assistance and FTA award management across an awards lifecycle. Okay, so now I'm going to take a bit of a deeper dive into each of those overarching categories of changes, and we'll start with some examples of significant statutes and regulations that have changed since the circular was last updated in 2018. Since 2018, we had a new federal multi-year transportation authorization enacted in 2021 to take us through federal fiscal year 2026, which was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the BIL. We've also had updates to the government-wide Uniform Administrative Requirements, cost principles and audit requirements for federal awards in the Code of Federal Regulations at 2 CFR Part 200, U.S. DOT's regulation implementing the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisitions Policy Act of 1970, also known as the Uniform Act, U.S. DOT's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Regulation, and regulations addressing the government's Buy America domestic preference. There are a number of examples of FTA established policies and procedures that changed in the circular and that are provided on the slide to give you an idea of what falls into this category. But a couple of them include additional elements that must be provided with required real property status reports, and that components removed from vehicles must be treated as an item of equipment for inventory and disposition purposes the same way we would treat any other item of equipment. There are also a number of examples of updates to the circular to enhance or clarify how pre-existing or updated statutes, regulations, and policies apply to FTA-assisted awards provided on this slide, but a couple of them include the addition of examples of incidental and shared use of equipment and the transfer of real property for affordable housing as part of transit-oriented development. Under the category of changes or updates to streamline, enhance, and improve stakeholder guidance on universal requirements for recipients' use of FTA financial assistance, one of the biggest changes was stripping out those universal requirements from the formula program-specific circulars and consolidating them into Circular 5010 so they can be maintained and referenced in a single resource. So in effect, Circular version 5010.1F has superseded the parts of the pre-existing program circulars that addressed requirements or procedures that don't specifically apply to those programs, but rather to all FTA programs. Okay, so a bit more here on what I mean when I refer to universal requirements and tying this back to the concept that Circular 5010 is a blueprint for operationalizing the applicability of statutes, regulations, and policies to the life cycle of awards made with FTA financial assistance. The requirements I am referring to are those derived from statutes, regulations, and DOT or FTA established policies that apply to all FTA financial assistance, regardless of FTA funding program. And on the slide, I have provided some examples of each of these. They range from such statutes that address equal opportunity for individuals with disabilities to such regulations as the uniform requirements for federal awards to such policies as FTA's minimum useful life of rolling stock. Some of the requirements you will encounter in the circular are government-wide, while others are specific to DOT or FTA. Some requirements will apply to all awards regardless of what recipients are doing with FTA funding, while others apply to awards for specific activities. In summary, Circular 5010 is a sort of repository of these requirements from various sources and relates them to FTA recipients' use of funds for public transportation purposes within FTA's established award management framework. Okay, so moving on within the same category of change to the circular, we made a number of enhancements to the presentation of the guidance. The updates included graphics and tables to better relate information to users, includes web links to external resources referenced throughout the circular, includes example scenarios for various concepts the circular communicates, and reorganizes various topics to streamline the document's use. So at a document structure level, what changed? Well, if we look at these changes on a chapter by chapter basis, most of the changes were made in chapters 2 and 3. We really didn't have any topical or structural changes to chapter 1, which is the introduction and background, and includes the circular definitions. In chapter 2, which explains what the circular is, provides an overview of FTA programs, and covers a grants management overview, we added a short section to explain the role of trams, added a section that broadly covers procurement requirements that were sprinkled throughout the pre-existing circular, and added a sizable section on universal cross-cutting requirements, which, as I mentioned earlier, were stripped from the formula program-specific circulars and consolidated into Circular 5010. In Chapter 3, which covers award development and the administration of awards, we added a section on pre-award planning and development that covers a range of pre-application or pre-award requirements and considerations, such as planning and environmental mitigation, preparation of project management plans, and others. We also added a section on pre-award and award prerequisites that pulls together system access requirements and certifications and assurances information, and added a section on pre-award authority. In Chapter 4, which addresses property administration and associated award management, we reordered some of the content to present overarching property administration considerations and prerequisites prior to getting into more activity-specific property administration requirements. We didn't really have any topical or structural changes to Chapter 5, which covers FTA oversight, and in Chapter 6, which covers financial management, we added a section on additional sources of local share that was previously covered in the formula program-specific circulars. Regarding the appendices to the circular, a number of them were removed for various reasons, as referenced on this slide. The most important point to make about the removal of these appendices is that the information contained in them is not going away. Some of the information is best maintained on FTA's website, some was included in the main body of the circular itself, and some was incorporated into the TRAMS interface. Further, a number of appendices were retained as provided on the slide. These appendices were determined to be critical for providing additional guidance on specific or special topics covered and referenced in the body of the circular. And a number of appendices were added as provided here. These include information previously included in at least some of the pre-existing formula program circulars, such as required prerequisite documentation for entities to be direct or designated recipients of FTA funds, instructions for preparing an award application and developing an award budget, and further guidance and instructions for award modifications after their initial execution. A new appendix that provides illustrative financial scenarios related to equipment disposition was also added that was previously provided within the body of Circular 5010. Okay, so that wraps up our higher level bird's eye view of changes to Circular 5010 and takes us to another important topic to discuss, which is the date the circular becomes applicable and its relationship to the effective date of associated requirements covered therein. The biggest point I want to make with this is, yes, the circular has a date it becomes applicable and supersedes the previous version, 5010.1e. So any policies or procedures that are set by the circular itself and not by another element of the governance framework for FTA financial assistance become applicable or effective November 1st. However, as I mentioned earlier, most of what is explained and clarified in the circular comes from other statutes, regulations, and policies established outside the scope of this circular. And they have their own effective dates that differ from the applicable date of this circular. So when and how the various requirements explained and clarified in the circular apply to recipients' use of FTA financial assistance depends on the actions of recipients relative to the enactment or effective date of the specific provision. This slide provides a number of examples of effective dates for specific issues covered in the circular that come from those various external sources or elements of the governance framework in relation to an example of a policy the circular establishes itself. So for example, allowing a transfer of real property for affordable housing as part of transit-oriented development was enacted by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law on November 15, 2021. So it would apply to any real property dispositions on or after November 15, 2021. That is in contrast to a change established by the circular that allows for notification rather than approval of certain incidental uses of FTA-assisted real property, which corresponds to the November 1st date the circular becomes applicable. All right, so now we are going to dive deeper into more specific substantive changes in the circular, and we'll start this off in Chapter 1 with the circular definitions. But before we jump into that, I want to talk a bit about the importance of the circular definitions and why they were updated. The circular definitions are the vocabulary we use to communicate and explain requirements, procedures, and other concepts to our recipients. They differentiate what something is and is not and establish a universal meaning for commonly used terms. The definitions for these terms were updated for consistency with the use of the same terms in the program circulars, so they all have the same meaning and we are all speaking the same language regardless of the source of guidance we reference. They were also updated to reflect changes to definitions for terms used in statutes or government-wide regulations, or to better clarify the relationship of terms to concepts communicated in the circular. We also added new definitions to establish common meaning for terms or concepts that are frequently used or referenced throughout the circular, and removed outdated terms or terms for which an associated concept really isn't communicated in the circular. All right, so I am not going to cover all of the definition changes that were made, but I will cover some examples of changes to definitions that may be perceived as more significant. The idea here is really just to provide a range of examples and corresponding explanations for changes to help circular users better understand the why behind the variety of changes. And we'll start with definitions that were removed. And for a couple of simple examples here, we removed the definition of concurrent non-project activities because that term and concept are isolated to and explained sufficiently in Chapter 3 of the circular. And we removed the definition for the term grantee because it is synonymous with other terms definitions that remain in the circular. Okay, so some examples of definitions that we added and the why include the definition for the term notice of funding opportunity because it is a term and concept referenced throughout the circular, and the term pre-award cost because it is also a term and concept used throughout the circular and is necessary to differentiate costs within the context of the concept of pre-award authority. And most of the changes to definitions were updates to pre-existing terms, and some simple examples of these include such terms as equipment, which was modified to be consistent with its definition in 2 CFR 200, including a change to the capitalization threshold that differentiates it from a supply and program of projects to account for programs of projects taking on different forms and serving different purposes among FTA formula programs. And also, for instance, shared use to clarify and differentiate it from an incidental use to include the concept of shared use of equipment as opposed to just real property, and to specify shared uses may involve any entity separate from the recipient rather than just a participant in the associated grant. Okay, so moving on to updates made in Chapter 2 of the circular to the list of FTA programs to which the circular applies and the relationship of the circular to specific FTA programs. The list of programs provided was updated to reflect programs that were authorized in our most recent legislation or the bipartisan infrastructure law. References to and descriptions for some programs were removed while others were added. It is important to note that the list in Circular 5010.1F focuses on formula programs, but the guidance included in the circular also applies to discretionary programs with some limited exceptions. And probably the most important point I'd like to make with this is that while Circular 5010.1F provides guidance on requirements that apply to all FTA financial assistance, and the formula program circulars provide unique guidance for those specific formula programs, notices of funding opportunities serve the purpose of providing unique guidance, requirements, and procedures for discretionary programs in a similar manner as the program-specific circulars do for the formula programs. Okay, so that wraps up my portion of today's session, and I will turn it over to Alexis Fisher, also in our Office of Grants Management and Guidance, to cover updates to civil rights and procurement requirements, as well as the addition of cross-cutting requirements in Chapter 2.
Thank you, Brett. And to think we're only getting started with all these changes to the award management circular. We still have 2 more sessions to go. So let's keep the ball rolling and start discussing some civil rights issues related to DBE in Chapter 2. The DBE, or Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, ensures non-discrimination in the award and administration of FTA-assisted contracts to create a level playing field. There is now a 2-tiered system as outlined in the regulations enacted on April 24, 2024. All recipients receiving planning, capital, and/or operating assistance must maintain a DBE program for their tier. So what exactly are these 2 tiers? Well, an FTA Tier 1 recipient is an organization that will award prime contracts, excluding transit vehicle purchases, in a cumulative total that exceeds $670,000 in FTA funds in a federal fiscal year. Please remember that the federal fiscal year runs from October 1st through September 30th. These organizations must have a DBE program meeting all of the requirements outlined in 49 CFR Part 26 and submit proof of the elements to FTA, establish DBE goals and submit those to FTA triennially or every 3 years, and submit their reports semi-annually. Conversely, a Tier 2 recipient is an organization that will award prime contracts, excluding, again, transit vehicle purchases in an amount that is less than $670,000 a year in FTA funds. These organizations must maintain an abbreviated program locally that includes a subset of the requirements outlined in 49 CFR Part 26. But they do not have DBE goal-setting requirements, and they only report annually. But as we all know, this is not the only type of procurement issue that we need to be aware of. Let's look a little bit deeper into the procurement requirements also outlined in Chapter 2. 5010.1F has a new procurement section when discussing some of the general FTA requirements. This section consolidates procurement requirements that were previously included in the various program circulars. It also includes distinct information for states and non-state organizations, as well as a new section on BABA, Buy America, Build America. So let's spend a moment discussing BABA a little more. So maybe we're just hoping that you will go gaga for BABA. Yeah, bad joke, but just checking to see if you're still listening. BABA, Buy America, Build America, takes the basic Buy America requirements and adds construction materials. So under BABA, steel, iron, manufactured products, and construction materials used in FTA-assisted projects must be produced in the United States. BABA applies to all awards obligated on or after November 10th, 2022. There are some additional cross-cutting requirements outlined in Chapter 2 that we would like to review. When developing an outline for 5010, we decided to add a section on cross-cutting requirements. Some may think that 5010 has always been about cross-cutting requirements, but actually there were several items that were included in the program circulars that just seemed to have a better place in the award management circular. The cross-cutting requirements included in 5010.1F are overarching statutes, federal regulations, and other requirements that apply to FTA awards. In Chapter 2, they are summarized in alphabetical order and have an outline of the requirements with statutory or regulatory text to provide more information. This is a rather extensive list, and I'd like to take a second just to highlight a couple items for your future use, as well as to figure out where you could perhaps get some more information if you needed it. So for the summary of grants management training, we reviewed SAM requirements, suspension and debarment, the master agreement, and search and assurances. The debarment suspension requirements as well as SAM are outlined here in 5010, as well as in those source documents or those documents that kind of govern the award. So since we have to sign the certs and assurances to get an award or pin them to get an award, and the master agreement is incorporated into the award, anything in there that talks about SAM and debarment is clearly included, but it's also included in 5010, so it's a little bit more digestible, and you can use those resources as you need. Another item that's included in both is the Hatch Act, which I only mention because it does make it clear that campaigning and such for political gains has a separate space than a financial assistance award. Also, we have environmental requirements that are outlined in 5010. This does not take the place of any other environmental requirements, including the SOPs that are referenced in this section of 5010. We encourage you all to review the SOPs on FTA's public website so you know how those environmental items impact your application award and your general award administration. The labor provisions that are included in 5010.1F are likewise echoed in the search and assurances, and some of these are actually integrated into TRAMs. So just like you need the SAM regulations, you need the SAM registration for TRAMs, the workflow for the DOL review or the Department of Labor review is integrated into our award management system. And now we come to the final section within this session, project signage. Project signage is a newer section added to address FTA's project signage preferences for FTA-assisted projects. FTA encourages recipients to display signage to identify projects as approved and funded by the U.S. DOT, or the U.S. Department of Transportation. Guidelines are included in 5010.1F for displaying agency logos, incorporating text, the placement of signage, associated costs, and other items. However, there is no specification on the format or size of signage that needs to be provided. This concludes our formal presentation regarding overarching changes for FTA Circular 5010.1F on awards management requirements. While this slide is entitled Next Steps, the ball is really in your court to decide what you would like to do. As noted, we are continuing our series of videos that will be posted to FTA's website through mid-November, so please keep an eye out for those. And the email address included here, FTA Circular Update 2024, all one word, at dot.gov, is actually a mailbox that goes directly to our staff. So if anything comes into your head, you have a question, a concern, something that you need outlined or refreshed or defined better, feel free to drop a line into there and a member of our staff will work on getting a response to you. The resources listed are the currently posted FTA circulars that went live at the end of September 2024. As part of our ongoing effort and commitment to serving the public, FTA strives to work with America's communities through improving public transportation. We share a vision of fostering a better quality of life for all, built on public transportation excellence through a commitment to service, integrity, innovation, sustainability, and equity. Thank you again for watching. We hope you'll watch the other videos related to the release of the 2024 FTA circulars.